Alright, welcome back. This is the 8th lecture now of the Power of Zoo conference. And the lecture 8 and 9, the final keynote lectures of the conference, I decided to blend together into one lecture, but then we're going to actually divide it into 2 parts anyways. So not much will change except on your program. We'll just consider it part 1 and 2 of a singular lecture. In this lecture, we'll call it biochemical fragmentation. And I appreciate your discretion for this conference. As you know, we're recording these lectures for instructional introduction to Mardukite Systemology, Mardukite Zuism for the International School of Systemology, and wanting to give them a good show. So we've covered a lot of basics in the last several lectures, and a lot of it being information that could be review, might be extraordinarily rudimentary for some of you. It's basically, I want to get, now that we're towards the end of this series, I want to bring us to a point, get you into the actual grade 3 NexGen Systemology, Mardukite Zuism, Mardukite Systemology material. The books that you see like at the back of the room, Tablets of Destiny, Crystal Clear. We have the original thesis now available. So I want to bring us into some current material, talk about imprinting and fragmentation. So in these Power of Zoo lectures, we've been given a basic introduction here, subject of NexGen Systemology, mainly as it pertains to the genetic vehicle. And really, our analysis couldn't be complete without examining also the nature of the physiological and biochemical qualities regarding personal fragmentation. And, well, particularly as it relates to all communications of sensory experience and information concerning the physical universe. Because, well, keep in mind, so long as the alpha spirit is controlling a genetic vehicle, there is always a potential for, well, what we refer to as fragmentation in NexGen Systemology. This semantic of fragmentation is quite unique to our Mardukite paradigm. Okay. So the recent standards providing advancements of exploration into the subject of fragmentation at the lower beta levels of personal experience. Now, this is explored quite fully in the Tablets of Destiny grade 3 volume, and then at slightly higher, more intellectual degrees of the zoo line activity within Crystal Clear, that textbook. Yeah, this is all actually like newly put out. Crystal Clear just recently came out, not just before this conference started, and Tablets of Destiny came out a couple months ago. But before this, I spent 2 decades exploring these concepts. And I now present them so casually, using these next-gen semantics we developed, like imprinting and fragmentation. But this has been, I've been working with this for actually over half my current lifetime in this incarnation, if not longer, other incarnations, which we'll deal with at higher levels of material. I know that's a bit much for some people to even bite off at this point. We're just trying to focus on getting these genetic vehicles running as optimally as we can. We can deal more with the spirit after that. And so now, between imprinting and fragmentation, the premise behind these 2 aspects is really what's provided, well, it did provide most of the original foundation for the paradigm, this paradigm of NexGen systemology as a whole. And that's in spite of, all of what's written and presented within our current NexGen library, which originally it was distributed exclusively underground by the MARDUKITE Truthseeker Press. Now it's jointly managed by the Joshua Free Publishing imprint. It's quite a considerable library of material. And the concept, it's actually far broader than is currently demonstrated even at this grade, the grade 3, which this lecture series is all introducing you to. If you've taken something, have earned some benefit from this material speaks to you, then obviously this would be where to pursue. MARDUKITE Systemology and Tablets of Destiny textbook, crystal clear textbook. Because we're actually wrapping up with Power of Zoo and those textbooks, and the original thesis now available again. Preparing MARDUKITE Zuism, a brief introduction. It's a small booklet. Actually has a lot of key points from Tablets of Destiny in it as a little pocket booklet. This is actually, and along with, we released John Toland's Pantheisticon about a year or so ago. This all encompasses entirely what we are treating as grade 3. And for those that are wondering, well, what's grade 2? That deals primarily with Mesopotamia and MARDUKITE Babylon. They build upon each other, but if you've understood what I'm relaying to you in this series of lectures, then you can move forward, and you can always go back to do more research, but there's benefits to moving forward, particularly because the nature of the material here that I'm giving you is meant to bring you to basically to the footsteps of these other textbooks. And so consider, if this idea that now I'm presenting fragmentation and imprints, I'm actually going to present it freshly here. Don't worry if you haven't already studied this material elsewhere in those other textbooks, because I want to provide a bit of background for those that haven't gotten into those textbooks yet. Not, all the seekers using our material, and there's certainly any dedicated systemologist should be very quite familiarized with our concepts, 2 concepts specifically, which is imprinting and fragmentation. This is pretty imperative. We haven't really discussed this much in the previous lectures because we're establishing some rudiments, some introductory material. But what I'm discussing now, I'm going to basically lead you right in to this higher level work that you have the ability now to explore independently on your own after this conference ends. So, okay, we're treating this a paradigm of semantics based in the Babylonian stargates, or if you prefer, like chakras of Eastern mysticism, or even some more modern methodologies towards self-actualization and some of the more creative uses of psychology. So the seeker is given a demonstration that there is something artificial attached to their awareness as self. And some paradigms go as far as to suggest that these artificial systems are even entities or identities themselves, which are attached to the individual and their experience of existence. But for whatever their nature, these artificial systems imposed on the realization of the true and actual alpha self or alpha spirit are precisely what we treat as fragmentation in Mardukite systemology. Now, so much of the prior, the grade 2 materials that comprise the Mardukite core, such as our complete Anunnaki Bible and information contained in what's been released as a Sumerian legacy, and even the complete book of Marduk by Nabu. This is already dedicated essentially toward defining defragmentation using, or as it pertains to, the ancient Mardukite Babylonian Stargate paradigm. And the semantics for this model as a progressive ascent or ascension up a ladder or pathway of what we call defragmentation, or else systematic reduction or processed removal of fragmentation from a system. And in this case, systems that apply to and as self and its identity continuum. Now, concerning the modern legacy, the Mardukite paradigm, for our present purposes, the subject of artificial fragmentation is introduced in the very first discourse of our NexGen field. And defragmentation is actually the title of its the second discourse. And both of these discourses are actually still available for your preview in the small reissued anthology, that Systemology, the original thesis. These were all the original discourses were actually quite quick reads, very pointedly written, similar to our recently released booklet, that MARDUKITE ZUISM, Brief Introduction. So that is why we actually say that the Tablet of Destiny is really the first primary textbook of our work, and then Crystal Clear, because these other ones really just set everything up for you. Now, I'm still going to define these concepts here in this lecture, because if someone here or listening to this later or online, it's going to immediately be lost amidst the semantics and the newspeak of our paradigm without understanding a few things. So let's see. Really the clearest use of these terms, it's in the premise, it's probably found in this original thesis of mine, where on one of the first pages here, it says the main key, insofar as the human condition has the ability to evolve beyond itself or what it's become, is not found in adoption of more systems or layers of reasoning, and no additional external technologies are required to take this critical leap. Rather, it is found in the critical ability to systematically remove all of the layers of artificial fragmentation so that all experiences, stimuli, or data can be correctly, self-honestly perceived and realized as existence and reality. And so this is a nice sentiment to launch from. Now, there's some seekers that have not yet moved beyond their misunderstanding of some of these basic terms, and hence why it's so important to provide an introductory course, which is both broad in its application to higher points of understanding and awareness, but particularly as achieved using Mardukite systemology, but of course also relevant, completely relevant, and applicable to the newcomer. So the purpose, of course, of this lecture series was to kind of demonstrate within the boundaries of this philosophy something effective and workable to be applied to your everyday life as well as you're presently perceiving it. So really, to understand our methods and models, one has to come to a realization that we're really describing a scale, a gradient scale, when we refer to self-honesty and fragmentation. In fact, they're probably best understood as like two ends of an observable spectrum, similar to the manner in which we might consider heat, temperature. We could use a thermometer to effectively gauge the presence of heat, or more specifically, ambient heat in an area. There's an observable range on this meter, and so at the top of whatever parameter or fixed range you're using, well, because we know it all extends out the top to like infinity. I mean, whatever range we might plot. So we just stick self-honesty up here at the top and fragmentation at the bottom, and and you could just as easily distinguish other qualities and mark, for example, the term cause at the top and effect here at the bottom, and then you can just superimpose the standard model or zoo line right over this. And you see how that works? And then such gradient scales are built into all demonstrations of existence and self, just basically using NexGen systemology and the standard model. It's as simple as that. And we can dig a lot deeper into the details, but that's really the nuts and bolts of it. So really, a person, even just with grade 3 materials, tablets of destiny and crystal clear, if a pretty dedicated seeker can actually pretty much figure out the way out the top for themselves just based on those materials alone. The entire map and everything is provided. But most of us were working on a gradient scale up and out. So the seeker, or rather their actualized zoo as awareness, they're said to be held basically in between some degree of fragmentation and some degree of self-honesty. And this state of fluctuation is what provides the elements of mystery and randomness in which you experience of reality. I mean, without such fragmented fluctuation, there is no mystery or dark fields present in our vision of awareness. For example, you take an optical lens, and you consider that the true self or alpha spirit is at its point of true existence, and we demonstrated over here at 7.0 or 7 on the standard model, the zoo line. So it's using this scope to look through the veils to receive communications from beta existence using the genetic vehicle. Now, in this perspective is only true and clear to the point or degree that the field and channel of communication is defragmented. And I mean, that's there it is in a nutshell. So metaphorically, if you have if we were to have a smudge on the lens, that would be a defragmentation. Or let's say we're flowing fluids through a pipe or channel that has some obstruction, and that would be a fragmentation. Or telephone landlines. Well, we used to have them. They had a lot of issues with dirty wires and connections and static and such. These would all be physical examples of fragmentation. Anything that disrupts the clear communication of physical energy or power or whatever it may be that's transmitted or radiated. So anything of this nature is, I mean, everything that we even described when they described the flows, the pipe and the phones, this is actually systematic communication that we're describing. What's varying is the nature of that communication, but all of this really boils back to communication. So let's see, I've given my notes here. Want to make sure we get through all of this this evening. Let's see. So I've given the examples of fragmentation as it applies to like the physio-material universe. But there are many forms of personal fragmentation that can carry similarities and certain tendencies, certain patterns, I guess, that we can even attribute various labels. But the exact nature of fragmentation is always specific or unique to the case of an individual. That's what we call a seeker in MARDUKITE and NexGen Systemology. It's basically an individual that is working their way through various processes and methods of personal defragmentation as a route to achieve, at the very least, the most basic state of self-honesty, attainable in beta existence. This is what the grade 3 textbooks, Tablets of Destiny and Crystal Clear, this is what they're designed for. This is actually also what the intended purpose is behind our grade 4, which is the piloted assistance for those using, for example, these type of textbooks. Now, basic state of self-honesty, once actualized, though certainly it's not the uppermost reach of spiritual ability within our paradigm. Okay, let me just tell you that right now. But this basic state is really what we are expecting as a minimum for the next evolution as Homo novus. And we've discovered that this starts to have less to do with the biological organism directly and more to do with the will of the alpha spirit that is self-directed along the zoo line toward the control centers of the genetic vehicle. Now, this will, as self-directed intention, it can only be affected to the degree that the channels are cleared of any fragmentary debris. All of these systems are interconnected on the continuum. That's the continuum we refer to as the zoo line in this series. And any of the perceived parts of these things, they're just as systematically connected to the relay of this information and energy as if there was just one mega system in operation. So that's there's various systems and working interactively together. That's one of the reasons why we call this all systemology. We know there's multiple systems working together systematically. And that comprises, to any conception one might ever have of the system. I mean, the system meaning like capital T, capital S. So, our best stab at such an understanding for this paradigm actually resulted in the standard model in zoo line. Thus, it is possible to know real things in this lifetime. Assuming, of course, you're grasping at something real to know about. Now, elsewhere in our grade 3 materials, there's sufficient instruction provided concerning one type of fragmentation that we call imprints. Now, for those that are not as familiar yet with our semantic use of imprinting, let's see, it's actually here, it's defined within any version 3 NexGen Systemology glossary, which means, well, you'll find it as an appendix in any of the grade 3 volumes for MARDUKITE Systemology. It's on the back. Let's see, and it reads, so to imprint is to strongly impress, stamp, mark, or outline onto a softer impressionable surface, or else to mark with pressure onto a substance or slate. That's a very traditional definition of the word imprint. In NexGen Systemology, the term imprint is used to indicate permanent reality impressions marked by frequencies, energies, or interactions experienced during periods of emotional distress or antagonism to physical survival, such as pain or unconsciousness, all of which are stored with other reactive response mechanisms at lower levels of awareness as opposed to the higher intellectual faculties of the mind system. Or an imprint may also be defined as an experiential memory set that may later resurface as reality if triggered or re-stimulated artificially or by one's present environment, of which similar reaction-response systems engaged automatically in response based on an original imprint. So as you see, we've gotten pretty involved, we got it pretty systematically defined there in those textbooks. And but I'm gonna break this down for you, and it's not my goal to try and like reiterate or condense several chapters worth of more advanced information into a few moments of this introductory lecture. Okay, suffice to say, we're dealing with a type of fragmentation called emotional encoding, or else imprinting. Now, this is a different quality of fragmentation than the type that's generally learned or programmed, like by more traditional instructional or the indoctrinate methods, school. We're not treating intellectual ideas in this case. There is a type of defragmentation that does we do that, but that's not what we're talking about here. Instead, the type of information that's retained specifically from emotional imprinting, which we also call encoding, it's when we call it encoding when the imprinting actually sticks or holds in place. So we generally divide the quality of fragmentation into two primary categories: the emotional encoding and the intellectual programming. Okay, so fragmentation could be any obstruction or disclarity of the situation. Then there are two basic types that we treat, one being more on the emotional level, one being on the intellectual mental level. On the emotional level, we treat it as encoding. On the intellectual level, we treat it as programming. Okay, simple enough. So understand we treat emotional imprinting as encoded and not learned. Okay, not learned in the conventional sense. That's what the main difference is. There's the intellectual or mental programming relies on some other type of logic, okay, to support a communication relay or some demonstration of its information. Okay, as we would expect, for example, being instructed in something. Okay, encoded imprinting is totally different. It relies on a certain type of reinforcement called biochemical, or if you prefer, emotional qualities of information. And that becomes its relay substance or its medium, the way that it's retained. It's not something that you're retaining as a set of facts. Okay? So, the significance, this is what we're concerned with, our considerations, our significances attributed to things. No, there's no intellectual aspects involved necessarily. It's strictly a sensation-based form of fragmentation. Well, in any case, the actual associations of information are not going to be based on objective, like truth or something. The encoded imprint is true, and it may carry information that becomes thought, but it's basically just true for the individual. And this is why it's important to know something about it. So if you want to have a good basic understanding of fragmentation and self-honesty that is workable, it's simply easiest to treat the concepts as opposites on a spectrum. You've got the idea of fragmentation, then you might understand self-honesty as the complete opposite state, or truest alpha state of clear knowingness and self-directed beingness, at the other end of the spectrum. Is the true ability of self is never actually less than this perfected state, but the actualized awareness may be dampened or diminished to a point where the self no longer has any clear and present handle on its own identity. This is very loosely along the same lines in beta existence when you hear someone use the expression that has, so-and-so lost themselves into something or other. But the truth is that nearly all alpha spirits operating a genetic vehicle for this beta existence are just doing so in some or another significant state of fragmentation. And all of the types, the information we consider imprinted, often it just poses the most significant energetic turbulence at low-level manifestations of experience. For those that are okay, so the imprints, they withhold circulatory flow of zoo awareness below 2.0 on the standard model. That's below the reactive control center kicking in. This is also below the level of awareness that we consider mental functions. That's all below that on the scale. I mean, the fact that imprinting and emotional encoding is an actual personal consideration taking place and given significance below the awareness level of the mind system or intellect. Okay, this is the very reason that we treat the subject with a degree of importance in NexGen systemology, because the fragmentation that takes place at this level, this is not something that can just be unlearned in the manner of which mental programming might be unlearned. This isn't a matter of just using right education. So that's more easy. We can deal with erroneous facts. Once accumulated, they could be dissolved by simply choosing to unlearn or reform or repostulate former handling of intellectual facts. But imprints, imprints actually can be treated in this manner at higher levels of self-actualization. So, it's just a matter of getting seekers up to that point. Even if, and even if there are faulty facts and fallacious logic entwined in the programming, such higher level programming can be dissolved very easily with higher level thought of a similar magnitude. That's something that's also treated at within our grade of work. But, what about the seeker while they're working up to these slightly higher level realizations? How does a seeker treat low-level imprinting that severely fragments and entwines awareness at levels even below what is readily observable as faulty logic, right? So what about the contents of all this? This thing we have here called the RCC, the Reactive Control Center at 2.0 on the standard model. Now, mental programming and intellectual or factual knowledge, even when it's wrong, it's able to be treated at higher range of intellectual faculties pertaining to the mind system. This information is also stored as a form of mental imprint or mental image, and it's quite complete and essentially holographic in nature. I mean, it's stored as traditional memory, like film of a camera, and it's most accessible for like analytical recall. And now this would be equivalent to what a psychologist just simply refers to as salient memory or surface thoughts. But this is, of course, not the only type of memory that's carried by an individual. It just stores the most accessible programming. And then the other type, this emotionally encoded imprinting, reflects like an entirely different type of information that actually supersedes higher abilities when it's viewed from the perspective of the physical body or the genetic vehicle at the other end of the spectrum on the zoo line. So, I mean, well, and we can easily say so because when examining the zoo line on the standard model, like this lower level fragmentation operates at frequencies that more closely match or share a higher affinity for, or simply are in closer proximity to, the direct physio-biochemical operations of the genetic vehicle. Now, the two main aspects of beta fragmentation, emotional encoding and mental programming, they're interconnected concerning the perceptual experience of beta existence, but in many ways, they're treated separately for NexGen systemology. For example, in our studies, the initial studies and our processing, we generally treat the subject of emotional fragmentation first, and this is described, for example, in the Tablets of Destiny volume. We generally treat this before approaching the higher levels of intellectual processing, such as what a seeker will find introduced in the Crystal Clear course textbook. A seeker's general state of fragmentation is thought to be basically a combination of both. So at the processing level of MARDUKITE Systemology, grade 3 and piloted grade 4, we're primarily concerned with encoding and programming what's most readily accessible from this lifetime. Although we certainly do not exclude the influence, or dare we say the perturbation, to use an old systemology term, we don't use it much anymore, of past life fragmentation, which we plan to treat directly at even higher grades. And it should be clear at this juncture that the pathway to self-honesty and the gateways to infinity represent a progressive personal journey of increased awareness. Specifically an increase of what we refer to as actualized awareness. That's the degree of awareness defragmented and completely under the control of self as alpha spirit, the true I am self. Now, this zoo lecture series, introductory material, it's placed a lot of emphasis on some of the more tangible, maybe workaday applications of the world, and stuff from the MARDUKITE materials, NexGen systemology. So, with that in mind, my intention is not really to stand here and reiterate these other readily available materials on the subjects of personal fragmentation and imprinting and defragmentation processes. In maintaining the spirit of this particular lecture series, I want to restrict focus, let's more illustrate tangible elements found in personal fragmentation and defragmentation that are not clearly relayed elsewhere in these other books. So basically, which directly relate to the treatment of the genetic vehicle, which is what's become our main focus in this series of lectures here. So even if a seeker has not yet studied the subject more deeply with these other materials, then it's easy to recognize that the human condition may not only be conventionally programmed at intellectual levels, but it can be encoded and imprinted upon using personal processes that very closely resemble what the psychologist might call conditioning. Although the clinical understanding of the same is really not actually comparable to our own widely encompassing holistic paradigm. So don't attempt to confuse the two, because well, don't bring the two together because it'll confuse you. Let's put it that way. We simply call it conditioned because it's encoded with a biochemical stimulation. It's because presently we're concerned with aspects of imprinting and fragmentation as it directly relates to physiological and biochemical systems of the living organism. I mean, this lecture series is really focused on the genetic vehicle itself. And what I mean is we're now at this stage, we're well aware of the nature of imprints and programming, and the various methods by which the memory is stored, encoded, or even learned. However, we've also found that a considerable amount of this, what's stored, is erroneous, it's implanted, and it's conditioned, and often it's kept out of direct analytical view. The imprinting that I refer to all pertains directly with associative memory. And it's probably the most subjective type of all possible experiential knowledge that you possess. Association imprinting forms as a result of emotional encoding. It operates well below the treatment of self-directed thought and entwines energy on the zoo line, manifests at degrees of closer to the lower frequency range of the physical organism or the genetic vehicle itself. And by this I mean, of course, so imprinting as tied to emotional neurotransmitters and reactive biochemical processes that are straight up reactive in nature. And all of this is plotted below 2 on the zoo line. Because this is heavy fragmentation. It's physiological, it's emotional, otherwise biochemical in nature. That's the lower the number on the zoo line, the more physical, the more solid it becomes. And we are dealing with material here due to its energetic quality that responds very quickly to changes in the physical environment and other interactions between the genetic vehicle and the energies and matter that vibrate at similar frequencies. Let me put this into perspective for you. So our personal experimentation suggests that significant amounts of imprinting and emotional encoded fragmentation is entwined at the biochemical range. And it's also held in place more strongly, kept hidden there, or even re-stimulated directly by other interactions within the biochemical range. And for example, certain drugs, chemicals, toxins, food additives, all of these, any source of chemical fragmentation may all actually render an individual outside the state of self-honesty far more susceptible to additional imprinting. It affects the stores or the charge quality of the imprinting. It affects the ability to recognize the RCC chains and sequences directly related to imprinting. And it certainly influences the awareness necessary to reduce influences or entwined charges of personal zoo that are withheld from the individual's free use by the imprinting. So as you can see, this is certainly some pretty serious stuff that we've stepped into. And this should provide something of a preview of what is in store for you as you take up this journey of the pathway to self-honesty and beyond to the gateways to infinity. But of course, this journey has a specific starting point, and it starts here. Making certain that we can maintain full control over the conditions of the physical body or genetic vehicle that is presently in use. It should be well understood at this point that while we do very much set our sights on the highest vistas of self-actualization and a route toward the highest ideal states of the human condition, such ambitions, once realized, may then only be actualized by taking up this path of a workable methodology, one that will actually yield the results. And it requires a bit of work on our part. The same methods used to fragment the human condition, the same systematic application of directed attentions, focus, and conditioning. This must all be processed out using a like energy and like force and focus. The way out is the way through, at least if you want to go out the top. As such, we cannot dismiss the fragmentation taking place at lower frequencies pertaining to the biological level of the organism. We can select the choicest glass specimens for our telescopic view from self, but if there is a smudge at the other end, if the channel of communication is not clear, then our intention of having a pure and holistic view is obviously thwarted. It's important that we clean up that smudge, because all of the higher level applications of defragmentation seem rather ridiculous for us to shoot for with any certainty when the most basic, physical, and identifiable sources of personal turbulence are left remaining unattended at the other end. My intention here is not to enforce some personal moral opinion or some ethic on lifestyle choice among the population. However, it remains quite obvious, well, to those of us looking anyway, that there is a way, or right way, which promotes a rise in personal actualized awareness and a total return to self as the Alpha Spirit. And there are, of course, many ways which do not promote such results and which, regardless of the tenacity and repeated effort applied, an individual is left with the task of fitting a square peg through a round hole, all the while telling themselves they are dealing with octagons or something. So, the physical universe is designed as such that it does require a little effort, a little work on our part, in order to make the things go and changes to manifest. And yet many individuals have succumbed to a belief that the effort and thought, regardless of how it is applied, will somehow be enough to carry a clear intention forward. And of course we know this is not the case. We know that aside from human sentiment, This notion of it's the thought that counts, or well, you gave it your best effort, just doesn't seem to pan out in the actual physical universe. We also know that individuals caught up in their own loops or spun in on one or another avenue of approach will just keep on attacking issues their way, neurotically expecting some other result to take place, one that would actually defy causal or cosmic law if it were to take place. Of course, the average fragmented individual does not know anything about this. They are expecting some miraculous magical break in the strongly enforced reality agreements already put forth to carry the existence of this physical universe as we are experiencing it presently. Now, I want to tackle this matter of the physical universe a bit more before we finish out this evening and our present lecture series. So let's take a break first. Let's meet back in 15 and for the final lecture of the Power of Zeus series. Thank you.